As the dawn broke over Alexandria in Egypt in early 290 BCE, the city was already alive with activity. Merchants from a dozen nations haggled in the agora, scholars debated in the halls of the Museion, and ships from across the Mediterranean unloaded their exotic cargoes. In the royal palace, the now 56-year-old Alexander, his hair and beard streaked with gray but his eyes still sharp as a falcon's, pored over maps with his generals and administrators. The age of expansion had yielded an empire of unprecedented scope. Now began the even more challenging task of binding these conquests into a cohesive whole. The Mediterranean awaited. Rome, still in its early republican phase and not yet the power it would become in our timeline, had been watching Alexander's western advances with growing alarm. Diplomatic missions between the two powers had maintained an uneasy peace while Alexander focused on his eastern and southern conquests. But by 290 BCE, with North Africa secured and his eastern borders stabilized, Alexander could no longer ignore the Italian peninsula. The Roman Republic of this era was formidable but limited, controlling central Italy but still contending with the Samnites and Etruscans. They had yet to face the Carthaginians in the Punic Wars that would, in our history, forge them into a military juggernaut. Against Alexander's veteran armies, battle-hardened from campaigns across Asia and Africa, supplemented by war elephants from India and a navy that dominated the Mediterranean, Rome faced overwhelming odds. The campaign began in the spring of 289 BCE with a naval blockade of Italian ports. Alexander, ever the student of strategy, had learned from his previous campaigns that controlling sea access was crucial for peninsula warfare. As Roman allies in southern Italy faced the brunt of Alexandrian landings, the Republic found itself fighting on multiple fronts. The decisive battle came near Tarentum in 288 BCE. The Roman legions, with their disciplined maniples, initially held their ground against the Macedonian phalanx. But Alexander, personally commanding from the right wing as was his custom, executed a brilliant cavalry sweep that broke the Roman line. The incorporation of war elephants, a tactic Alexander had perfected in his Indian campaigns, proved devastating against troops who had never faced such beasts. Following this victory, Alexander employed a strategy of differentiated treatment that had served him well elsewhere. Cities that surrendered were granted favorable terms, maintaining local governance under Alexandrian oversight. Those that resisted faced harsher consequences. Rome itself, recognizing the futility of continued resistance, negotiated terms that left its republican institutions intact but acknowledged Alexander's suzerainty and required both tribute and military contribution to his campaigns. This approach, preserving local structures while establishing overarching imperial authority, became the hallmark of Alexander's integrated empire. Unlike later Roman conquest that imposed more uniform administration, Alexander's system embraced diversity within unity, creating a federated structure held together by personal loyalty, cultural exchange, and economic interdependence. With Rome subdued, Alexander continued his western expansion. Campaigns into Gaul between 286 and 280 BCE extended his influence to the Atlantic coast. Here, Alexander encountered Celtic tribes whose warrior ethos he found reminiscent of his own Macedonians. Rather than attempting complete subjugation, he established a network of Greek trading colonies along the coast and major rivers, creating economic ties that gradually pulled these regions into his imperial orbit. Expeditions to Iberia followed a similar pattern, with direct control limited to coastal regions and key mining districts, particularly in the south where silver mines would help finance further imperial projects. By 278 BCE, Greek merchants were trading as far north as the British Isles, though no formal conquest was attempted of those distant lands. As Alexander approached his 70th birthday in 276 BCE, many expected the aging king to retire to one of his magnificent capitals and leave further campaigns to his sons and generals. Instead, he turned his gaze northward, to the steppes beyond the Danube where Scythian tribes posed a perennial threat to Macedonian territories. This northern campaign differed from his earlier conquests. Rather than seeking to incorporate these vast, sparsely populated regions directly into his empire, Alexander focused on establishing a defensive frontier. A series of fortified cities, New Alexandrias, were founded along major rivers, serving as military bases and trading centers. Between these urban strongpoints, a network of alliances with semi-nomadic peoples created a buffer zone protecting the empire's settled core. By 270 BCE, this northern frontier extended from the Adriatic to the Caucasus, with regular diplomatic and trade contacts reaching as far as the Baltic amber-producing regions. The foundations were laid for what would, in later decades, develop into a flourishing trade network connecting the Mediterranean world with northern Europe centuries earlier than in our timeline. Throughout these decades of western and northern expansion, Alexander never lost sight of the East. The riches of distant China had long been whispered of in Persian courts, and now, with his empire stretching deep into Central Asia, these rumors gained substance. Initial diplomatic missions dispatched around 275 BCE traveled the arduous routes through the mountains and deserts of Central Asia, eventually reaching the territories controlled by the rising Qin state in what is now western China. These first contacts were tentative and exploratory, with Alexander's emissaries bringing gifts of Mediterranean luxury goods, fine textiles, wines, olive oils, and crafted metals, while returning with samples of silk, jade, and sophisticated Chinese bronzework. The reports they brought back ignited Alexander's imagination. Here was a civilization that, in many ways, rivaled his own in sophistication and scale, a potential partner, but also a potential rival. The Qin state, then in the process of consolidating its power over other Chinese states during the Warring States period, viewed these foreign contacts with mixed feelings. On one hand, the exotic Western goods and knowledge of distant lands proved intriguing. On the other, the reports of Alexander's vast conquests raised alarm among Qin strategists, who recognized a potential threat to their own expansionist ambitions. What began as cautious diplomatic exchange soon evolved into something more complex and contentious. By 272 BCE, Alexander had established a network of trading outposts along what would later become known as the Silk Road, with Alexandria Escate, Alexandria the furthest, serving as the primary eastern hub. Caravans began moving with increasing frequency between the Mediterranean world and China, carrying not only goods but also technologies, religious ideas, and cultural practices. The flourishing trade brought immense wealth to both civilizations but also created friction. As Alexander's influence expanded in Central Asia, it began to encroach on territories the Qin considered within their sphere of interest. Nomadic peoples of the steppes, traditionally paying tribute to Chinese powers, now found themselves caught between two expanding empires, often playing one against the other for their own advantage. The first direct confrontation came in 268 BCE over control of the Darim Basin, a crucial link in the emerging Silk Road. This fertile region, dotted with oasis cities, had long been influenced by Chinese culture but never directly controlled by the Chinese states. Alexander, recognizing its strategic importance, began establishing Greek settlements and garrisons throughout the area. The Qin ruler, alarmed by this encroachment on what he considered China's western frontier, dispatched a substantial military force to assert Chinese authority in the region. The resulting clash near the oasis city of Kashgar in 267 BCE was inconclusive, with both sides claiming victory but neither able to establish clear dominance. It marked, however, the beginning of a prolonged, great game that would define Eastern policy for the remainder of Alexander's reign. Rather than escalating into full-scale war, this competition took the form of proxy conflicts, diplomatic maneuvering, and economic rivalry. Both powers cultivated alliances with the various nomadic confederations of Central Asia. The Yuezhi, Wusun, and other steppe peoples found themselves courted by envoys from both east and west, offered trade privileges, subsidies, and military support in exchange for loyalty. Alexander, drawing on his extensive experience with Persian and Indian diplomacy, proved adept at this game of imperial chess. In 265 BCE, he orchestrated a grand alliance of several nomadic groups, supplemented them with detachments of his own forces equipped with superior siege weaponry, and launched a campaign that secured control of several key oasis cities previously leaning toward Chinese influence. The Qin response came 2 years later. Having learned from their earlier encounters with Western military technology, they dispatched an expedition equipped with improved crossbows, capable of penetrating Macedonian armor at greater distances than previous designs, and their own siege engines. This force recaptured some of the contested territories and pushed back Alexander's proxies from the easternmost oases. This pattern of advance and retreat, alliance and counter-alliance, continued throughout the 260s BCE, creating a fluid frontier zone between the two great powers. While full-scale direct conflict was avoided, the distances involved made sustained campaigns logistically impossible for both sides. The ongoing competition drove military innovation and adaptation on both sides. Alexander's forces adopted and modified Chinese crossbow technology, combining it with Greek mechanical expertise to create more powerful torsion-powered weapons. The Chinese, in turn, were influenced by Greek metalworking techniques and tactical innovations. The armies that clashed in Central Asia increasingly resembled each other, combining elements from both military traditions. Beyond military matters, this competition accelerated cultural and technological exchange. Defectors, prisoners, merchants, and diplomats carried knowledge across the frontier in both directions. Greek mathematical concepts and philosophical ideas traveled eastward, while Chinese astronomical observations, agricultural techniques, and bureaucratic practices moved west. Even as the two empires contended for supremacy, they were being subtly transformed by their contact with each other. By 262 BCE, both powers began to recognize the costs and limitations of their Central Asian rivalry. Alexander, now in his 84th year, had gained a profound respect for Chinese civilization and came to see the futility of attempting to subjugate such a formidable culture. The Qin ruler, still focused on completing the unification of China, was reluctant to commit excessive resources to these distant Western campaigns. A series of diplomatic exchanges culminated in the Treaty of Sogdiana in 260 BCE, establishing a demarcated sphere of influence for each empire and formalizing trade relations. The Darim Basin was effectively divided, with western oases acknowledging Alexander's suzerainty while eastern ones remained in the Chinese orbit. A demilitarized zone was established between them, with joint monitoring to prevent violations. This pragmatic accommodation allowed both empires to focus on their core interests while benefiting from regulated trade. The Silk Road, now operating under the protection of both powers, flourished as never before. Luxury goods flowed in both directions, but perhaps more significantly, so did ideas, technologies, and cultural influences. The confrontation with China, though never escalating to a total war, had profound effects on Alexander's imperial project. It was the first time he had encountered a civilization he could not simply overwhelm through superior military force or incorporate through cultural prestige. The Chinese experience demonstrated the limits of empire and the necessity of coexistence with other great powers, a lesson that would influence Alexander's approach to governance in his final decades. While the eastern frontier was being stabilized through this mixture of conflict and diplomacy, the internal development of Alexander's vast domains continued at an accelerated pace. The challenge facing Alexander was immense: how to govern territories spanning 3 continents, encompassing dozens of languages, religions, and cultural traditions. His solution combined elements from multiple administrative traditions, Macedonian, Greek, Persian, Egyptian, into a hybrid system tailored to the needs of his unprecedented empire. At the highest level, the empire was divided into satrapies, following the Persian model but modified based on Alexander's experiences. These large administrative units were governed by satraps chosen from various ethnic backgrounds, though Greeks and Macedonians remained overrepresented in these positions. To prevent these governors from establishing independent power bases, Alexander implemented several control mechanisms: regular inspections by royal officials, separation of civil and military authority in most regions, and frequent rotation of personnel. Beneath this imperial superstructure, local governance remained largely in the hands of traditional authorities, city councils in Greek polis, tribal leaders in less urbanized regions, temple hierarchies in areas where religion played a central administrative role. This layered approach allowed for efficient imperial control while respecting local traditions and reducing administrative costs. The bureaucracy required to manage this vast empire grew increasingly sophisticated. Record-keeping systems borrowed from Persian, Egyptian, and increasingly, Chinese models were implemented throughout the empire. A regular census, conducted every 5 years, provided demographic information essential for taxation and military recruitment. Standardized weights and measures facilitated commerce and imperial administration. Communications, essential for coordinating such vast territories, received particular attention. The Persian royal road system was expanded and improved, with regular way stations providing fresh horses and accommodations for official messengers. Alexander established what may have been the ancient world's first true postal service, with dedicated couriers carrying official correspondence throughout the empire. In coastal regions and along major rivers, ship relays provided even faster communication. This communication infrastructure not only served administrative needs but also facilitated scientific and cultural exchange. Astronomical observations from Babylon could be compared with those from Alexandria or Memphis, allowing for more accurate celestial mapping. Medical knowledge from India could be shared with healing centers in Greece or Egypt. The intellectual ferment resulting from this rapid information exchange accelerated scientific progress far beyond what occurred in our timeline. Economic integration proceeded alongside political unification. A standardized currency system based on the Attic standard facilitated trade across the empire. Royal mints in major cities produced coins bearing Alexander's profile, now showing him older. With the ram's horns of Ammon prominently displayed as a symbol of his divine status. While local currencies continued to circulate in many regions, major transactions increasingly used this imperial coinage. Learning from Chinese administrative practices, knowledge gained through both diplomatic exchange and intelligence gathered during the Central Asian confrontation, Alexander implemented new systems of economic planning and resource management. Royal monopolies were established for certain key commodities, ensuring stable supply and pricing while generating reliable revenue. Infrastructure projects were coordinated at the imperial level, allowing for more efficient allocation of resources and expertise. These infrastructure developments transformed the physical landscape of the empire. New roadways connected the Mediterranean basin with the Black Sea, the Red Sea, and the Persian Gulf. Bridges, tunnels, and mountain passes were engineered to facilitate movement of troops and goods. Milestones marked distances, and way stations provided accommodations for official travelers and merchants. Water management projects, drawing on Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and newly acquired Chinese expertise, transformed arid regions throughout the empire. Irrigation systems, dams, and aqueducts supported agriculture in previously marginal lands. Desert regions in North Africa and the Middle East bloomed with new cultivation, supporting growing urban populations and generating additional tax revenue. Perhaps most impressive were the harbor works and lighthouse constructions that facilitated maritime trade. The Pharos of Alexandria, which in our timeline was constructed after Alexander's death, was in this alternative history commissioned by the king himself and became the model for similar structures at other major ports. These engineering marvels, combining practical utility with monumental scale, symbolized the empire's mastery over nature and its commitment to commercial prosperity. Cities were the lifeblood of Alexander's empire, centers of administration, trade, and cultural exchange. New foundations continued throughout this period, though at a slower pace than during the initial conquests. These later Alexandrias were planned with greater sophistication, incorporating lessons learned from earlier urban experiments as well as ideas imported from other urban traditions, including Chinese city planning concepts, grid layouts, extensive public spaces, water and sewage systems, and defensive works were standard features of these new cities. Each major foundation included a gymnasium, theater, and temples dedicated to the imperial cult alongside local deities. Some cities developed specialized functions, centers of textile production, metalworking, glassmaking, or other industries, creating an early form of economic specialization across the imperial landscape. Existing cities underwent dramatic transformations. Athens, though it had resisted Alexander earlier, became a cultural jewel of the Western Empire, its philosophical schools receiving royal patronage. Babylon experienced rejuvenation, with Alexander finally implementing the restoration projects he had contemplated before his illness in 323 BCE. Memphis and Thebes in Egypt saw new construction on a massive scale, blending Egyptian and Greek architectural elements. This urbanization accelerated cultural hybridization. In the marketplaces and symposia of these cosmopolitan centers, ideas and customs from across the known world intermingled. Fashion, cuisine, religious practices, artistic styles, and philosophical concepts crossed cultural boundaries with unprecedented speed. A traveler moving from Alexandria in Egypt to Alexandria in Arachosia, modern Afghanistan, would find familiar elements alongside exotic variations at each stop along the journey. Language played a crucial role in this cultural synthesis. Koine Greek, already spreading as a lingua franca before Alexander's conquests, now became the common tongue of government, commerce, and high culture throughout the empire. Local languages persisted for everyday use, but knowledge of Greek offered access to opportunity and advancement. This linguistic unity facilitated the transmission of knowledge and ideas across formerly separate cultural spheres. The cultural policies pursued during this period reflected Alexander's evolving vision of his empire. Rather than imposing Greek culture wholesale on conquered peoples, he encouraged a process of selective adoption and adaptation. The resulting cultural fusion, Hellenistic civilization, combined Greek forms with local content in ways that made the imperial culture accessible and attractive to diverse populations. Following his encounters with Chinese civilization, Alexander developed a more systematic approach to cultural exchange and integration. Impressed by the Chinese examination system for selecting officials based on merit and education, he implemented a modified version within his own empire. While birth and ethnicity still conferred advantages, a formal system of education and examination was established for entry into the imperial bureaucracy, creating pathways for talented individuals from non-Greek backgrounds to rise to positions of influence. Education became a key mechanism for promoting this cultural integration. Gymnasiums were established in cities throughout the empire, providing Greek-style education to local elites and creating a common cultural framework for the next generation of imperial administrators. These institutions taught not only Greek language and literature but also mathematics, rhetoric, philosophy, and physical training in the Greek manner, increasingly supplemented by knowledge from other cultural traditions. While promoting this cultural synthesis, Alexander also demonstrated respect for local traditions. He continued his practice of adopting aspects of local royal customs, participating in traditional ceremonies, and honoring indigenous deities. Temples were built or restored throughout the empire, often incorporating Greek architectural elements while maintaining local religious practices. This religious syncretism reinforced Alexander's own divine status while accommodating diverse spiritual traditions within the imperial framework. The confrontation with China had profound effects on Alexander's religious and ideological policies. Exposed to Confucian concepts of the ruler as a moral exemplar and Taoist ideas of cosmic harmony, Alexander began incorporating elements of these philosophies into his own imperial ideology. The concept of the king as a bridge between heaven and earth, already present in Egyptian and Persian traditions, was reinforced and elaborated with ideas drawn from multiple cultural sources. The flourishing of arts and sciences during this period would have far-reaching consequences. Greek dramatic forms blended with local performance traditions, creating new theatrical expressions. Sculpture combined Greek naturalism with the symbolic power of Egyptian and Near Eastern artistic conventions. Literature in Greek explored themes and stories drawn from many cultural traditions, while translations made Greek classics accessible to non-Greek readers. Scientific inquiry benefited enormously from the bringing together of different knowledge traditions. Greek theoretical approaches combined with Babylonian observational astronomy, Egyptian practical mathematics, Indian numerical concepts, and Chinese engineering techniques to accelerate discovery and innovation. The Macedonian and Library of Alexandria, vastly expanded under Alexander's continued patronage, became the premier research institution of the ancient world, attracting scholars from every corner of the empire. Medical knowledge particularly advanced through this cross-fertilization. Greek humoral theory engaged with Egyptian practical experience, Indian Ayurvedic concepts, and Persian herbal knowledge to create more effective healing approaches. Chinese acupuncture and diagnostic techniques, introduced following the increased contact between the empires, added another dimension to medical practice. Alexander, who had almost died at 32, took particular interest in medical research, funding investigations into diseases and their treatments throughout the empire. Military technology and organization continued to evolve, driven partly by the challenges posed by the Chinese confrontation. The traditional Macedonian phalanx, already modified through campaigns in different environments, underwent further transformations. More flexible tactical systems were developed, incorporating elements from various military traditions. The imperial army became increasingly professional and diverse, with specialized units drawn from across the empire utilizing their particular skills and fighting styles within an integrated command structure. Naval technology advanced similarly. The Mediterranean fleet remained dominant in its home waters, but new vessel designs were developed for operations in the Indian Ocean, Persian Gulf, and Red Sea. Drawing on both Greek engineering and the seafaring traditions of Phoenicians, Egyptians, and Indian Ocean peoples, these ships were better adapted to different maritime environments and capable of longer-range operations. By his mid-80s, Alexander had achieved what no ruler before him had even contemplated, not just an empire of unprecedented geographical extent, but an increasingly integrated political, economic, and cultural system spanning much of the known world. The foundations were laid for a truly universal civilization, transcending the traditional boundaries between East and West, North and South. The man himself had changed profoundly over these decades. The impetuous young conqueror had evolved into a reflective sovereign, still capable of bold decisions but increasingly concerned with consolidation rather than expansion. His personal appearance reflected this transformation. He maintained his clean-shaven Greek style but adopted elements of Persian royal dress, creating an iconic image that represented his multicultural empire. The confrontation with China had been particularly transformative for Alexander's worldview. Where once he had dreamed of conquering to the ends of the earth, he now recognized the existence of civilizations beyond his ability to subjugate. This recognition fostered a more nuanced approach to power, one that acknowledged limits and sought advantage through means other than direct conquest. His personal life centered on his extended family, his aging Bactrian wife Roxana, who had given him his first son, his Persian wives and their children, and additional diplomatic marriages contracted over the decades. Alexander IV, now a man in his 30s, had been carefully trained to continue his father's work. Serving as governor of important provinces and commanding military campaigns under Alexander's supervision, the succession question became increasingly pressing as Alexander entered his 9th decade. Unlike his historical counterpart, this Alexander had the luxury of planning for an orderly transition of power. Rather than concentrating authority in a single heir, he established a system drawing inspiration from both Macedonian traditions and Persian practice, with clearly defined roles for different family members and trusted non-relatives. As Alexander approached his 90th year in 257 BCE, the empire he had built faced both unprecedented opportunities and significant challenges. The Age of Integration had created a framework for a unified Eurasian civilization, accelerating cultural and technological development beyond anything possible in our actual history. But questions remained about the sustainability of this vast structure, particularly after the eventual death of its founder. The administrative systems Alexander had established, while impressive, still relied heavily on his personal authority. The cultural synthesis, though progressing rapidly, remained incomplete in many regions. External threats, particularly from nomadic peoples beyond the northern frontier and the still expanding Chinese state to the east, could not be permanently eliminated. And the question of succession, despite Alexander's careful preparation of his heirs, loomed on the horizon. These challenges would define the final phase of Alexander's extraordinary life, the Age of Legacy. As we shall see in our next chapter, the aging conqueror's efforts to ensure the survival of his creation would lead to further innovations in governance, culture, and imperial ideology, leaving an indelible mark on human civilization in this alternative history.